Hey guys, this is Meta Dreamer. Just wanted to introduce you to this episode of Meta Radio between Peter Pan, James Young, Drew Harding, and myself. We talk about everything from food supply, farming, economy, finance, COVID's impact, digital nation states, building communities, the future of Web3, some philosophical discussions on trust and transactional relationships, and a lot of really awesome stuff. So I hope you like it. It's going to be a long and juicy one.
I forgot who I was talking to the other day, but I just imagine 100 years ago, back when people were just living on farms, everyone during the day would be within 100 meters of each other. The whole day, people would go farming, someone would go fishing, right? Maybe this is I don't know. This is maybe my fairy tale vision of what America should have been, right? Someone's fishing, someone's farming, someone is building the house, someone's cooking, if you ever try to cook for 8-10 people, that's intensive. So imagine trying to do that 3 times a day. Someone has to do the cooking.
Right. And you don't have the conveniences of a modern refrigerator, electricity, and things like that.
You get meat and you have to butcher it. You don't get just mince, right? So it's imagine you have to get the fucking animal and you're oh, is this gonna rot? I gotta salt it. Figure out, okay, get the meaty steak bits. Maybe I have no fucking I have no fucking clue when. Yeah, I have no clue when society transitioned from the convenience. But yeah, it's the vegetables. Seasoning.
And you get, and then I feel like we're kind of getting back to that, at least in the kind of modern version of it. And I'm cooking a lot more. We used to go out and eat a lot, but because of the lockdown, a lot of our, experiences as a family, we're going out to restaurants and eating and stuff like that. But now it's I have to cook.
But yeah, I was looking into food supplies recently as well. And just one of the stupid questions you ask is why do we still have world hunger? Right.
It makes no sense either.
Yeah, and it's it's honestly the answer is bureaucracy. It's not that we can't produce any. It's isn't it stupid that people are just hungry, but due to politics and poor governance, basically.
Well, what we know too about food production is I don't know the exact quote, and I'm not claiming its accuracy, but there was someone, and it's kind of it's fairly popular. It's we could produce in the size of the state of Texas enough food to feed all the people on the planet if done properly and efficiently. It's not about land mass.
No, it's about distribution, right? Yeah. In food.
And one of my big hypotheses out of this whole thing is we're going to see an explosion of urban hydroponics. And we're going to see a move towards a necessity towards hyper-local food production, because these supply chains we've become dependent on for production are totally breaking down. And it's just not an efficient way of producing and distributing food. I'm actually going to start testing this locally within my neighborhood, because I'm a huge gardener. We've all started, people within around us have started to get really into it. I'm just going to start dropping off flyers to all my neighbors saying nice. Hey, I've got this excess, happy to drop it off at your door, no face-to-face, whatever.
Right.
Here's my Venmo if you're interested, and just
do what happens.
It goes to looking at all these existing retail and movie theater chains and these places that probably won't reopen or a movie theater would be perfect, because it's these siloed bays that you could set up stadium grows in, specific monocultures in each one, and you could do massive production. Someone actually just posted, I forget where it was, but yeah, my buddy, I was telling him about this, and he said that the Guggenheim in New York, the Frank Lloyd Wright building, they basically set up in the main display, outside display area, a hydroponic tomato grow. So
nice.
Yeah. So this is I think you're already starting to see some of this trend. I've tried to focus my attention away from confusion of what the fuck is this and going on, and fear as a result of not knowing where we are or what's happening, or people don't even know where food comes from. You ask the average millennial, it's where's food come from? They'll be grocery store. You know what I mean?
Right.
Totally.
If you go to Sweden or Germany, every other like house in suburbia has its own garden. This is like they've been doing this for generations, and like they'll be fine as a result of that. That won't even be an issue for us in the States. Like the idea of like growing a garden, everyone's got a lawn. A lawn is like fucking worthless. That's like, why are you growing grass? You know what I mean? Like this is, or ornamental flowers. Like I've never understood that to me. Like sure, it's pretty, or pollinators, like, and like we just recently relocated, and there's like 5 different, actually I think there's 6 different fruit trees like on the property, and like that's incredible. Like seasonally, a bunch of them are ripening now. We made a ton of like homemade lemonade yesterday. We have like these like satsumas and stuff. I'm just like, this alone is worth like excess benefit.
Totally.
I think everyone's like talking virus, and they're talking like online, virtual, like tech is going to save everything. And ironically enough, community is going to become more important, and collective management of resources and distribution of resources and responsibility is going to become more important in these times, which is kind of, again, counterintuitive.
Why do you think so?
I think like as a result of supply chain breakdown and disruption, everything that you'll need will have to be produced and hyper locally. And that will come down to like obviously bare necessities first, and then even up to entertainment and like, you know, everything else.
I'm curious, are the problems of like, you know, America today mainly coming from supply chains like and bureaucracy? I don't know, like that's what the situation brought is.
The capitalist like mindset kind of has pushed this individualist consumer.
Yes. The interesting thing is like I was listening to this podcast, right? And they studied like the capitalistic, you know, hyper-capitalistic nature of America itself, right? Interestingly enough, the idea around consumerism and excess, right? And about like making money being a goal in life, right? Has only been around for the last 50 years. And just like from what I can remember, right? It talked about, you know, just the idea that people had different life goals aside from just making money, you know, like I think, you know.
Think like post-World War II,
right?
Or like World War II going into post-World War II, like all of our propaganda and like, you know, Rosie the Riveter, like you too can help out. It's like, you know, help the country, like do your part, you know, all that kind of, that were carried in and like through that generation up until probably like the 60s and like 70s, in the sense of like the sexual revolution. Like how can we push those ideas on a social level further? And then that led to basically the 80s and the growth of financial sector and banking and financial services. And that's, I think, when you really saw the like consumerist mentality and culture kick in the States. Coincidentally, I think we're finding ourselves pushing one end of the spectrum back to our earlier kind of seemingly unrelated conversation about yin yang, right? Like this individualist mindset of like me, like take care of my own, stack my money for like my family,
right. It's like, what's the point of money right now? You know,
the interesting thing, you know, though, is just like, okay, so like we're here now, and it's almost like we've been able to like take a break and pause and just take a look around. It's almost like we've been able to collectively as a human race, well, it's like we just hit pause, like time stopped, right? And we're like, okay, well, let's look around, let's see what's happening. And so that article that you posted, you know, everyone is going to want to, in like the next 2 or 3 weeks, go back to this like normal life. So what is this new normal going to look like? That's what's interesting, because like you'll see like, okay, there's no more U.S. Postal Service. Like, okay, I don't get mail anymore now, and like these things are gonna close down. You know, what does this mean, right? And this is why I think when it comes to like supply chain, you know, this whole globalization, this like desire to have this like monoculture probably is not going to jibe well, and people are gonna want to go back to something else, and that's where I think it will be this hybrid localism, but globalism kind of at the same time. So it's like definitely a shift where it's like, you know, what's happened in this experiment with the internet over the past 30 years, it hasn't provided that equality. It's like winners and losers.
There's a good podcast on like this guy, I forgot his name, but he co-created Pirate Bay. And there's a podcast on him about like what the why behind activism, right? And he's just kind of like in the podcast really deflated, or at least really realistic. And he's just like, yeah, we can't really do much about this. And it's like what did we expect? Was a lot of these idealistic visions or just like idealist nonsense, and maybe that we take ourselves a bit too seriously and the world around us too seriously. He had this view of like, we maybe have these grand dreams, but maybe they're just like the things we like to think about and we wish to happen. And they, in reality, don't have they have a minuscule need in the world, to be honest. There's that side of things as well, right?
As always, I think it goes back to balance. Like, we now have like global knowledge, but we're realizing it's about like local action. And like,
right.
they say like, again, like, you want to change the world, you got to change yourself first. And I think like people are looking at like, yeah, if we want to make these broad sweeping societal changes, like, why don't we just start in our own neighborhoods? Why don't we start in our own families, ourselves?
Exactly.
And from there, these like start to compound. And also with like now this new normal of everybody remote and distributed, like the meaning or importance of being in some hyper metropolitan city is gone. It's meaningless. You could be anywhere in the world, live from anywhere you want. So it's communities even now more important, less about like a seemingly geographic like beneficial location or like it's okay. Now it's like, where's the farm at?
It's like, why do we go to conferences when we could just like go find a plot of land in somewhere in the middle of nowhere and like all rent like a place there like all year round for like $5,000 a year, and that just becomes like the place we go to for conferences.
Or like the conference timeshare.
No, that's right. Well, it's interesting because it's like things have their own momentum, and like even with big cities, it's because people needed to like get jobs in factories, and then you think, okay, well, that led to actual schooling, right? Where you actually had to be in school 9 to 5, because public school at least isn't about education. It's about creating good citizens so that they can then go to the factory and then they can work, right? And so now you have this all online education. You're forced to go work or be educated online. Then you think, okay, well, why do I need to actually travel and go to a school? And so now people are like questioning. And I think there's going to be this like kind of this interesting narrative that the genie cannot be put back in the bottle, because people are going to want to go back to how they have done things so that everyone can have a sense of normalcy. But in the back of their mind, they're going like, why am I doing this? And so that's going to be like, this kind of this shift in momentum where things like halted, and then you had a moment in time to like double check, like, okay, wait, why am I doing what I'm doing?
I'm excited. Again, though, I'm trying to focus on like what this could mean, or like the opportunities that exist, and also like the societal and cultural benefits as a result of all this stuff, which I do think that there will be some. Like, law is going to completely shift. Like on the point of casinos, all right, well, casinos can't be a thing. Online gambling just became fully legitimized, and like all the laws preventing that stuff are just out the window. Porn, same thing. Like all the like stigmas around that stuff, because everyone's sitting at home. All the single people sitting at home, and they're like afraid of going to meet someone. They can't like have a real relationship. Also like financial regulation, securities laws. Like if the economy is ground to a halt, they're going to need to do everything they can to spur innovation, to like push this like the needle forward, bring new money in. Like, our taxes dead? They're saying like, I don't have to file or pay my taxes till July. Is that even going to happen? I'm hoping not. But like, is this?
It's interesting too. Hey guys, by the way.
Hey.
Welcome.
Yeah, all these reports of like, in LA, the sky is like finally clear after like so long. And like, there's coyotes walking around, and like the air is nice again for like the first time in like however long, right? So it's like the earth has had like a fever with like humans.
You know what's funny? In all these dystopian images, we see like, fucked up environments, fucked up air, and people wearing masks, right? But instead, imagine it's the reality is the sun's glaring, it's blue skies and people wearing masks. They're hiding indoors while the weather's beautiful. The nature's like flourishing now. Animals, is hopping around.
To that point, like if the air got so bad and like or whatever else like that led to most of these dystopian visions, like that would mean we were able to just maintain that way of life, which were is probably unlikely. So yeah, you're seeing the opposite. Like when everything grinds to a halt, nature, it has like that counterbalancing, effect of like. I love to like all the monkeys in like India and Thailand and all these places that are like dependent on tourists for feeding.
Oh, I know. Yeah. They're like, what's going on?
They're like going into like the streets and the stores are getting like aggressive and attacking people because they're not being fed. Like it's crazy how like everything is shifting.
Yeah. The whole rebalancing of the world. I think it's really like a shift that's going to like really, I don't know if people are going to be able to understand this like concept of like if the whole world can like change on a dime, and it's because of like this health scare, right? It's a matter of like survival, and so everyone is able to like shelter in place all of a sudden like globally throughout the world. It's just like people can move, people have information, but it's going to be these like kind of constructs in our mind of like, why are we organizing ourselves in this way, waiting for government? And I think it goes back to Drew's point. People are going to like say, fuck it, I'm just going to take things in my own hands and like start, doing things. And I think that's kind of where this like transition and these like pandemics and these like crises wake some people up, or like go think, okay, well, let me do things on my own. This is where like the technology can then be used, because people don't have an incentive to like coordinate and do stuff, because there's this momentum of how they were doing things the way before.
Like a lot of this makes me realize how ignorant I am, like of like just Earth. Like, hey, I didn't even know how plants really like how to grow plants until like about 2 weeks ago, when I suddenly like was like, hey, like making money is not that important really. Like being healthy is. It's like, what are things you need to be healthy? It's like food. It's like, okay, fruits and vegetables. It's like, wait a minute, I have to go to the fucking shop. What, then they started like thinking about sustainability, and just like, fuck it, I'm going to go out and start a garden to learn about plants. Like they're pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, I'm feeling the opposite. I'm feeling like very validated in many of my like interests and hobbies and pursuits now, because like in terms of like, I've been hydroponic, aquaponic, like raising fish, plants, like gardening, all this stuff. Like I've had this like prepper mentality, self-sustaining mentality for like decade plus, and like I mean it's in my blood. It's like partially family.
Back when like back in like 200-300 years ago or 1,000 years ago, it was like a village, and you'd be the guy who'd be like the master of trades.
Jack of all, master of some. Yeah,
like that. Yeah, that guy like farms. That guy like builds tools.
It's interesting because like if this were to happen like 2 generations later, or like a generation and a half later, and we kind of continued this like sort of like hyper-connected world where we're just used to everything being given to us, like all the people who kind of had these skills would kind of start being to like die off, and like the younger generation does not like care about this, and they're just kind of like normalized to like getting Uber Eats and McDonald's and like all this sort of stuff, right? So it's like it's kind of like it's good that it happened now rather than later, where we still kind of have some sort of like sense of like the old way of doing things, and we can kind of latch back onto that.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's just like it. You know what it is, and this is kind of what it comes down to. Like when you talk about supply chain and all of what we're doing here, like we've come to a point where we have the efficiency and the ability to distribute, but we can't coordinate. And what it comes down to is like you're destroying food rather than giving it out for free, because there's no mechanism to do that. Even though we have the railways, whatever.
It's not efficient. It's
it's like imagine you have a village and like everyone grows their own shit, and if they have excess, there's a truck that comes around like every 2 days that collects the excess from everyone and gives it to people they need. I'd imagine that's like some level of like that probably happened a long time ago. You know,
in India, that's exactly how it still works.
Right.
Those guys in trucks like drive around their like villages and they sell the food direct. That's how like a lot of people in rural areas actually
milkman.
India still.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like now they're saying that needs to happen in the U.S. and other places, right? Like where we need to go back to the old ways. They think it's something new that like, oh, we can get like food delivered straight to our home.
Well, then it's like
when you got like one chicken farmer or like one massive chicken farmer, he's gonna like that guy's constantly just like instead of producing the best quality chickens, he's like, how do I make this fucker bigger? How do I like pump it full of antibiotics and steroids and tests and like everything just to like boost this guy? It's like put him in smaller cages. Like how can I produce more of the thing? Versus like if it's all about like individual like production, everyone will be like focused more on the quality versus like the volume and the supply. It's like the efficiencies and like the what we prioritize in the existing kind of like production culture is totally we've skewed towards price, not value, like on everything, fast fashion, like food, everything, right? So it's like we're finding ourselves go back to like all this. Like,
I think people kind of understand this innately, but there's no way to like take action, right? There's no way to like to start these like localized communities. And so I think what will happen is you'll see a lot of people try to do something. It's kind of like startups, right? Like most of them will fail, and then there'll be one example, hopefully, that can become this blueprint of what that could be. Because right now, like, you know, the government's printing money. These banks are like, yeah, great, free money. But now, like, in order to get a loan, like if you want to buy a house, the actual requirements are more stringent now. So this is how like the transfer of wealth kind of happens, right? To like to and the collusion and whatnot. And so people are gonna like, fuck it, the system's not serving me. But then there's no way for these people to like be able to, I don't know, take action or you know, become a collective.
Here's the thing, like the global financial crisis was a money crisis, right? I mean, it had second and third order effects that rippled in all areas, right? But, you know, like as all economic crisis does, but this is a first order health crisis. Like it's about our health. And during a health crisis, your priority is health, not money. It's like money could go to shit at any time now in the next couple of years. Honestly, you know, like who knows? So that's in question. And you're really just worried about like, I don't want to get sick. I don't want the ones around me to get sick. Right. And it's like that really, like, I'm not sure if you guys know Chamath, and if, you know, Papatier or something like that, you know, CEO of Social Capital, right? Like really smart hedge fund dude who came from Silicon Valley. But he's like, basically, he made a really good point around like how like money is like, doesn't matter for like, at least now, maybe temporarily, but it kind of casts an illusion on it. Right. Of like, you can use get food to, you know, for rent, shelter, all these things. But it's like, is that really the bottleneck here? Right.
The purpose of money in terms of serving as like a medium of exchange in the sense of like a unit of account, which it was seashells at one point, coins, whatever. It could be anything. It just has like the group, the community, the collective has to decide that this thing has value. It can act as a marker. That makes
but today our concept of money is like you use money to make more money, not more value, right?
And it's like when you can make it out of thin air, it kind of breaks the whole thing. It's like it'll go back to like, hey, bro, you got a tomato, I got an orange. I want a tomato, you want an orange. Like are we gonna skew full back to barter? Are we just like, do we need these things to like? I don't know. Like,
did you know the concept of game theory was invented during the Cold War?
No.
And that's when, you know, the game theory economics, you know, emerged in the concept of corporations and businesses. It was all about maximizing shareholder profit, you know, and that's when, you know, that was kind of like, I'm reading through my notes right now, right, from these like things I'm listening to. And, you know, I think it was like the CEO of Kickstarter, or at least a former CEO of Kickstarter, who was saying this. And it was like, that was the period in which we switched from like being this like society about value, you know, creation towards like just purely profit, right? And getting money to make more money, right? And I think he also mentions a fair point that we've been exploring as well. It's like, Moloch DAO, right, and Metacartel DAO and all these other grant-giving DAOs in the ecosystem in Ethereum right now, they don't create money, but they create value.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's not the end all be all, but that's like better than just making more money for the sake of it.
Yeah,
right?
I think this idea of like billionaires, right? Oh, billionaires create a lot of value, but like you could be a billionaire and actually be creating net negative value.
Right.
And someone could be like have $0 in their bank account, but could creating like millions and millions of dollars of value, right? It's like, and it's actually like, if you're accumulating money for yourself, like that in and of itself is like negative value creation, because like you're sucking out value, you're not creating value.
It's a tax on everyone else.
Yes, there's so many avenues and ways to create value that could also make money, right? That could also be very financially lucrative. But if you're just for the sake of creating more money out of more money, it's like, what's the point, right?
So how do you get like the Metacartel to like experiment with like a geolocal DAO that could have like a self-sustaining?
I have a plan. I have a plan.
But then you don't want to get all like super cultish either, right? So
you do. But okay, so here's a plan. So step one, you create a fully digital nation state online, right? You just like no agenda. The goal of the nation state is to empower its own people and increase the GDP output collectively. Think of this as like a new sheltered group, right? And then it would grow in size, just like Metacartel has, right? It will grow and grow until it doesn't scale anymore. But it grows to a point where maybe in LA, there's like, 10, 20 people in LA who are from this nation state. Maybe in different cities, it might be in a similar scenario. And then you split it off geographically. But then you start off, right, with a seed of like culture, rather than just FinAd. People want to recreate new structures. And, the idea of a nation state, right, or country, of what creating a new country is a new blank slate to think about these problems.
I think you just have to run the data, right? You figure out where the largest Ethereum meetups that have the greatest cross-section geographically with like co-op grocery stores or something. And that's where you start. Like you start with the data there, and then you just like do the analytics.
I don't think you need to start off with like crypto people. I don't think you need to. Like you just need normal people. You just need normal people willing to put skin in the game. That's all you need. Like the thing is, digital nation state. How do you start? Is like you need a chef. You need people of every class and sector. You can't just have software people. Like software is such a small part of life.
I'd argue the easier approach would be just create a flyer, distribute it to all your neighbors. Be like, do you have a garden? Do you produce?
So that's ignoring the whole advantage of the internet. The internet, it's great at finding people and aggregating people of similar interests. You need to use that. I think you can't start off with blank slate. Like you need to start off with something.
That's why I'm saying it's Bitcoin and Ethereum. Like these are like big social economic networks that already exist. Now you got to take that local. You got to like take that big blanket, that big network, and you hyper localize it, and you have success one or two places that can be repeated. This is the playbook that needs to be created.
I disagree with it's Bitcoin or Ethereum because no one gives a shit about each other on these. It's decentralized. It's the whole point of these nation states and communities are that they are centralized. I think it's not the narrative of centralization versus decentralization, because I think that is the wrong perspective to take. I think it's about like trust, right? I think it's
Metacartel did an ICO, right? It's like in that way people want to be able to get in and get out, but it's about being permissioned and it's about like collective action.
It's a network of trust and relationships versus transactional relationships, right?
Yeah,
Bitcoin and Ethereum are transactional relationships. You can't, you can't start. They're not community. It's a whole decentralized network of people.
But you need that. You need that as a base layer, and then from there you can have a trust layer, and then above that you have a geo-based layer. Right. It's like
Ethereum and Bitcoin are the electricity and money, right? That powers the system. That powers like
They're the infra.
They're the financial infrastructure, right?
Yeah, and then you build on that. And so you have Metacartel, which is the most successful like trust-based group because it did an ICO. It's actually inverted where people aren't like trying to get money out of it. They're actually just trying to put more value in. Now you get up higher on this like, food chain or this like community-based chain of collaboration. you need to be able to like find your tribe. That's why you need Ethereum and Bitcoin as a base layer, because you need to be able to walk away at any point. But once you start your tribe and then you start collecting ideas and people, what you described is basically with Metacartel is what has happened. At the top of the pyramid in the mental model I'm suggesting is like you have that self-sovereign individual.
Right.
But the self-sovereign individual cannot ever live by themselves. But that's not what self-sovereignty is about. Self-sovereignty isn't about like kind of like what we were talking about earlier,
Right.
where the whole idea of capitalism is being able to like have the most and aggregate the most, right? The self-sovereign individual is not about collecting and being self-sufficient. It's being able to have the network that you want. And the base network at the very bottom of the pyramid is this like permissionless network where you can kind of come in and come out. On top of that, you go up where you have a trusted community, and to the point where at the very top, you're just trusting yourself. And you know that you can kind of weave in and out of different communities because these communities are based on a permissionless network. But it's not like centralization versus decentralization. I think it's just like this hierarchy of like who you are, because no human can survive on their own. Else you'd have seen that in history. People need each other and they need to work with each other. There's no one person in the world that is completely self-sufficient. That's a myth. That sovereign individual is that myth, right? But it's this ability to like be able to fluidly come in and out of networks and communities as you choose. And this is why you need to like have this like pyramid of trust in a sense. Ultimately, self-sovereignty is just being able to trust yourself.
I also think like people are overlooking the freelancer model of like this person works with different projects and companies and whatever, right? I almost feel like people are overlooking the idea of like, I guess like a raid guild, right? A group of people that just goes on raids and self-sustains each other, right? Because like a freelancer can't really go on paid vacation, right? They can't, afford to take those benefits that a team can provide, right?
I think that comes back to coordination and organization. Right. The reason why like people work for companies is because it was harder to coordinate. It's a coast theory, right? Where the organization and legal structures are set up this way, where an organization is a legal entity, like a person, because that legal entity from a law perspective can coordinate a lot faster than the individual. But that was 50, 60 years ago. Now we have the tools and we can transfer value and data. Now, like, can like a new form of organization, like you're saying, where people are more fluid, where people, law, society is based around modernity, where you had corporations in a factory going to an office. So now you peel back to first principles and you don't need that anymore. And you can self-organize. Then like, this is where I think people will kind of like question the kind of nature of money and value, kind of question like what is a government really, why can't we just govern ourselves? So it's just all this stuff is gonna trickle out. I think and people might not know what to do with it, but the cat's out of the bag. So where do we go from here?
A big fundamental shift in my belief system was like, what is the value of like money in this time of crisis? It's like, it's not,
it was
past a certain point, it doesn't matter,
It's trust. It's all trust. Like, I don't have to trust this person because they hold an instrument, a unit of account that I know will give me value once I get it. And so now we have trust liquidity in these new structures and like these
trust liquidity.
This is a mod in one of our last credits where credits due, but like that's an amazing phrase. I think that's super poignant. Right. And trust can now take a new form.
It's like in the last 10 years, companies are all driven by profit, and it's all been about data decision making. But we've ended up with nothing but these monolithic, abusing entities, right? These machines that are great at like creating profit and data based on data. And it begs the question, like, how do you like build organizations that are a bit more nuanced? And one of the things is that, things about trust, we haven't been able to quantify things such as trustworthiness, or even like things such as like, what does community spirit mean? Or like, how do you quantify the propensity to give to a community? I mean, until you can quantify this, it's really hard to like pin these things against like making more money, right?
Well, I think that's a very dangerous road to go down to, because when everything can be priced,
right.
What you're talking about is price discovery for everything. Once something can be priced, and once you put a price on it, you've turned that trust into a transaction. You fundamentally change the nature of the relationship. That subtle thing about pricing, scoring, your credit score, right? That's how your trustworthiness is your credit score, but that could be manipulated. Because now Now the shelling point is not creating trust. The shelling point
It becomes
is
gamifiable.
Min-max that number.
So how do you how do you get to a place of comprehension? Right. And that makes me almost like, if I really want to take a really left field view, that's why we had like these spiritual technologies, a long time ago. It's like, I don't know, that's like a weird theory I had where it's like, there might be technologies that we just don't have that allow us to, comprehend those areas.
Yeah, I think like this idea of like trust liquidity, it also means that like we have a bit more nuance, and it's not like a binary thing that I either have to be like completely transactional with you or completely trustworthy with you, where we have that little like ability to kind of like be in this like quantum state in between those two things, and we can modulate that based on our own sort of like human intuition. Right. Back to what you said about these like, these ancient like technologies that humans have had for a long time, right? That is kind of where we get that intuition.
Right. Our society today is driven by the mind and the head, right?
Yeah.
We use like scientific method to find the stuff, the like oral histories and like wives' tales and all these things around like eat an apple a day, for instance, like this idea. It's like we had to scientifically prove like the reason and the value for like, and specifically right. Like apples are high, and like it's something that produces like, it allows your body to expel right. Basically toxicity a lot more.
There's a lot of mysteries about the past, like how did the ancient Egyptians know so much about the brain? I don't know. There's actually a lot of unexplored and unexplained things where oftentimes maybe we have to accept that we can't really understand them through our current mode of thinking.
That's the thing with science. If we have this mindset that like we're not going to accept anything until it's like 100% right. proven, is like really right. limiting, right? For example, like everyone in Silicon Valley doing like intermittent fasting and like all these things that people have been doing for like hundreds and thousands of years, right. That like, they're now showing the benefits that we can prove them, but like before they didn't need to prove them. They kind of just like
climate change.
It goes back to trust, right? Like you have the scientific method because the scientific method is a transactional model where you don't have to know who did something. You could reproduce it, and like now you don't have to trust that person at all. So the scientific method, science is based on pure fact, zero trust, where there needs to be a blend of that.
And what just lazy today
is each community, each person, each society needs to be able to figure out its own blend, right? Because it's not purely transactional. You can't go down that road because that is a very lonely road where every single transaction.
That's what we're at today.
Every relationship is transactional. Well, I think that's kind of like where the pendulum is going to go back to this trust, right? Yeah. And so it's like figuring out how to use the technology that we have, price discovery, value exchange, all the stuff that's like really easy to do, but then kind of map it back into like base human tribalism or something like that.
Well, James made a good point a while ago where it's like, like the government used to be called civil servants. It was a shit job being a civil servant.
Oh yeah. Being a banker in the 70s and the 60s before Nixon got off the gold standard, it was just like a worthless job, right? Like it's just you're literally they used to call computers people that computed things.
Yeah.
Because it was just like there was no automation there. And so the definition of being a banker in the 70s is a lot different than it is now. A banker, actually, you would go to the bank and they would interview you to see if you're credit worthy enough to get a loan. So the banker back then in the 70s was someone that was dialed into the community. That was a person that will say, should I take a chance on you?
Right.
And because there was limited resources, you can't just print money.
Interesting.
We're on the gold standard, and there was no financial engineering before because you couldn't artificially inflate something.
Imagine all the bankers after Nixon just like, hey guys, did you realize that we can just like make money out of thin air? It's like bankers discovering smart contracts. Like, wow.
It's basically, they're like, you know what? Let's create this ability to do flash loans, but never have to repay. We can just continue flashing. Just continue flashing.
Right. It's like, holy shit, guys, we can make so much money. We can just like do this forever. Right. Sounds good.
Well, but I think the thing is that it's like it's going to be harder now, even though like the U.S. is printing money out of thin air for things to collapse because we're all interconnected. And the game theory and the incentive is for everyone to keep that machine to keep going. No one wants it to crash. No, there's no incentive for it to like play out naturally.
Let's all just walk away, go hyper local, and it'll naturally just like be.
There's actually a book by Cory Doctorow. He's a science fiction writer. He also writes like part of this group called Boing Boing. He wrote a book called Walk Away, and it talks about the future of like not quite dystopian, but when you're a government and you can't issue violence, the only thing that you can do is like just peace out, right? And that's the thing is that when you have society and you have people that are dependent on each other, the last thing you want is that society to like kick you out. Because once you're alone, that's the worst.
Once we learn that we can survive and actually act productively and efficiently as like hyper local communities, people start to realize like, wait, why do we need the municipality telling you? Why do we need even security forces, police? If we can self-police, like all that stuff is possible right now. Like I was like, I don't give two shits about like importing hogs from China. I can grow mine right here. I don't, like, it's like people, they just don't even have that frame of reference. It's like we've been so detached from all that. Like,
yeah, I think there'll be a shelling point now because just like, the Bitcoin network, like Satoshi launched right after the financial crisis, right? Because there were many attempts at launching digital or cryptocurrencies before, but it was the financial crisis that allowed other people to come out of the woodwork and go, shit, like I'm looking for another option. Because if Satoshi were to just launch the Bitcoin network by himself, it would have never taken off. It requires this network effect. And how do you bootstrap a network effect? You can bootstrap a network effect over time, 1, 2, 4, 8, and exponentially grow. Or you can start and create a network effect because everyone, at the same time collectively wakes up and goes, shit, that's what I want to do, right? I want to go there. And I think this is where it's like the opportunity for like these hyper local DAOs to kind of like start forming.
I'm curious, if you went and like somehow moved to like a hyper local town, what sort of like lifestyle would you want or like to have around you? Like one thing I would definitely not want is to have it to be full of software people.
I want to be able to have people that can like teach my kids things that I can't teach them. I want to be able to just eat.
Yep. You want to have good chefs. You want to have fucking people who can cook, right? And bake stuff, bake cookies and like other shit.
Electrician, it's carpenter.
Right. You want a carpenter. Correct. Right. So like, it's more of a question of like, if you wanted to start off a society, who do you actually need? Because you can't just have software people. Like most people in the crypto space think they.
What you do is like you get to, I think you just map onto what already exists. Like you cannot start from ground zero. You have to be able to start from some type of starting point. And the starting point are like not major metros. Like I would think that you'd be able to start this more likely to start in like Boulder than in Denver. For example, if I wanted to do this in Colorado, right? Because you have farming, you have people that are like in tech, you have people that are like crafts trades people that are already there. Like they already have to exist. The trade and the crafts people have to exist, and that doesn't happen in like dense metros, and it doesn't happen in complete rural. There's like this like kind of sweet spot, this aggregate sweet spot where I think you can start this out. Like even Hammad was showing like the freight farms, like it's
right. That was more of a question of like what sort of people do you need to run a society, right? It's like a Barbara. It's like, is that necessary? Yes, no, train one up. It's like
they already exist. These like smaller towns already have them together. The infrastructure already exists. Yeah. Right. So you just map on top of that. You don't have to like scorch earth and start over again. Like you just map on top of the ruins. That's what people did, right? They had cities. The cities were ruined. They would just like build on top of those cities because that's where the people were. So we just like we're creating this like virtualized economy on top of like these physical ruins.
I think like Peter, back to what you were saying before about like these digital nation states and versus like hyper localized communities. I think like it's going to be a blend of both because like in today's world we can't get away from the internet. Because right now, look at us right now. We would not be able to do this without the internet, right? And if we're kind of only reliant on people in our hyper local communities, we're severely bottlenecked, right? So even if we figure out a way to, have these hyperlocal communities, a huge part of it is still going to be these ideas of like digital nation states. Because digitally, yeah, we might not be able to like cut each other's hair or like cook meals for each other, but we can share ideas and knowledge and like emotions and all this sort of stuff.
Global knowledge, local action.
And in a way, like I go to visit the US sometimes. I'm Australian. I don't belong there, but I visit there. Just like you would visit different online communities. Like it's like you might belong to the metagame or the metafam, crowd, and that's you're a citizen of the metafam, right? But like that doesn't mean you're a citizen of like, say, Bitcoin land. If we enter their forums, right? But we can exchange ideas, and we have.
You don't have like a dominant identity.
Right, correct.
I think this is like metagame is kind of like a fork of society where like we just go from first principles. We throw away everything we know about society, and we have this like complete empty canvas that we can kind of take all of our learnings and like sketch a new map out. We come up with a better implementation where we don't have the baggage of like the way things are currently done, right? We kind of rip that off, and then we go back to like, okay, let's see what we did that was good and take those parts, and then let's see the things that we did that were bad and like ignore those parts. We had this idea of like MetaFam alignment 2021 where we like rent out this huge villa in Croatia. We have 3 houses, like sun, water, and earth, and then that is kind of like an experiment in like a hyper localized community. And like in the midterm, like we do have this goal of like starting online first, gathering like ideas, people, resources, build these coordination mechanisms, and then eventually congregate into like geographical locations. By starting from a clean slate, I don't mean forgetting everything, but it's like when you like delete a software repository and then start from scratch and don't have all that technical debt in there, but you can still take all the good ideas.
You can still need to order off Amazon, for a long time. It's like, and then it's like maybe there's a group in charge of building a farm, and then over a few years you lower the costs that you need to like spend, right? And until all you need is just internet. And the houses and accommodation, you build it yourself.
What you do is you buy like 4 or 5 freight farms, and then you hook it up to a DAO. And then people get points to be able to like cultivate that and farm it. And then who got what from the farm and all that. That's how you start, right? Like you get a mall, an abandoned mall in LA, because an abandoned mall is going to have like all this parking space. You drop ship 4 or 5 freight containers, right? And then it's all like on your phone. It's all done digitally, like, and then you have people tend to it. And then instead of paying with money, you just have some DAO shares or whatever.
That's a new banking. It's like, should you get food or not?
That's the geo meta cartel right there, 1.0. And then like you build off of that, and people are like, oh, okay, you know what? I have these DAO shares. I want a haircut. You want like, I'll give you some of my shares or whatever, and give me a haircut. And you're like, okay, great. And then that's how you start it.
That's exactly like those kind of things that we need to figure out. Because like the example you mentioned before about like all these farmers having to throw away like milk and food, it's like we can't make this work without kind of figuring out these coordination problems, right? Like these freight farms, like we need to be able to like have these accounting mechanisms where we can like be able to like see what's going on, see who's doing what, who has what to give, right? Like if I want to trade a tomato for a haircut, I need to know who in this local community can give a haircut and who has tomatoes, right? Like in RuneScape, for example, we have this idea of the grand exchange, right? It's like kind of this like central point where people can like post up their goods, post up their services. Everyone kind of congregates there, and that's like that communication layer, right? So we have the technology now, and like we have the existing people like barbers, people who farm and all this sort of stuff, and we just need to bridge that gap, hook them, like connect them into that sort of like informational grid. And then even if it's like it's not like a global internet, but like a hyper localized internet, even on a local scale, we need to solve for like these technology and kind of coordination problems using these same sort of like informational networks.
You have to do it in such a way at the beginning where it's very low risk. You're not going to say, okay, I'm going to, depend 100% of my food on this, right? Like it has to be low risk, and then it like gradually becomes more. And that's how you incept that idea. It has to be easy to begin, easy to start. And then this is the roadway or the path for people to then start understanding this.
There's no loss or risk in doing so or participating, right? It's like, I'd argue that like the best thing we could be doing from an experimentation standpoint is like each of us independently, like running this experiment within our local communities and like with all these knowies, with this non-crypto native audience, and see like what works, what doesn't within, and then share collectively back amongst our group what these learnings are, and then like start to like build up. And then collectively, we actually have these places emerging and popping up all around the world that start to link. And now they start to like coordinate collectively in that sense. Like that would be way more powerful than like defining a nation state, plopping it down somewhere, trying to like build it. All of us go to that one place because it's like we're basically have the understanding, the thought leadership, and like the infrastructure knowledge to be able to like deploy and help others do this. We're the new missionaries.
That's what the digital nation state is right? A lot of locally dispersed groups coming together. It's like that's the new state model, and then like the whole top level is going to be, you know, the federal kind of, but they don't have like jurisdiction, but they have influence, and you want to be networked into this bigger group, right? And not just confined to like your one group, because you may want to move from one hyperlocal community to another. How do you do that? Oh, you go up, you know, and you say, okay, what are the networks that are around me that I can hop into?
It makes sense to like focus on certain hubs as like meccas.
Yeah. And then Hammad might want to dip into Colorado for like 6 months and then bounce to somewhere else later on, right? So you have that ability to travel, but you're networked into this greater, like you're dialed in, because you're like, Hammad did some stuff in Colorado, so he earned whatever, like these points or tokens or whatever, and then he's good and his rep is good. He moves to somewhere else and he can kind of do that same kind of work. This is how Uber started. This is how DoorDash started. I know the founders of DoorDash. This is how they started. They started like trying to figure it out in San Jose. They actually, what they did was they created a landing page first, and they said, if you want food delivered, call this number, blah, blah, blah. They would deliver the food themselves, the actual founders. And then what happened was they were able to create that playbook, and they moved it to somewhere else. And then they modified it a little bit, but they actually had people, a deployment party. Right, so you may have some core people in Metacartel that actually move and help set things up potentially. Then they move somewhere else, and then they leave, and then everything, you know, is self-sustaining. This is how like Uber worked. This is how DoorDash, Grubhub. This is how Postmates. This is how all of them work. Right? It's like they actually have to tune it for their specific locale, but there's a playbook that gets written. So it's not like you rely on operators geographically and say go. You start centralized, and then you spread the knowledge, and then you have this like best practices that come out, right? Because then maybe with freight farms, you have volume discounting, or maybe you have people within the metacartel that actually fork their own version of freight farms, right? And then like go in and teach people how to, like there's all this different ways of like, you know, getting to scale that you don't know of how it's going to happen until you start doing it.
You don't need a lot of people like to create like a large movement as well. Like for example, Adidas in Berlin, they started a runners club, right? Where they basically started like creating clubs for running. And, you know, basically they created a playbook to start these running clubs all around the world. And they basically have like just about 10,000 people in the clubs all around the world. Yeah, collectively, everyone just like us, like, you know, the Metacartel, we retweet like Yayla's tweet about the virtual hackathon, right? And like we get like 30 retweets in like less than a minute, right? Just like them, they all retweet the post on social, and their 10,000 people allows them to reach like pretty much like millions, like, you know, I'm not sure how much, but like it basically is a result of the reach around the world. And it's like you don't need to like get to millions. You just need like a pocket here and there, and then it grows. And within, you know, a few years, it scales. The network effects do exist in the reach, right? And it's about like creating these missionaries that can like amplify in all these different areas. Like, for example, it's like the problem of like, you know, crypto is that, you know, it's about echo chamber, so that, you know, the amplification of our reach isn't really used to a great effect, right? We're just speaking to the same people, but that's very different when you have like a chef involved and they have their own field. When you get a mechanical engineer involved and they have their own discipline and their own field, right? And then you have like all the real people in real societies, you know, are like that make up a society, right?
That's what I've really noticed that from metagame too, is that there's like a ton of people that are just sitting on the edges, right? Like there's a huge crypto bubble, and we think that we're just like a super like bubble, and there's like no one else outside sees it, but there's actually tons of people that have eyes on us, but they're just not like connected or networked in, right? Like, And we need to kind of like, as soon as we start like sort of, roping these people in, roping people who aren't like crypto natives, but are interested in it and have like that motivation to like learn more.
This is really interesting because it's like when the .com bubble burst, the people that were left over were like the diehard like technologists that believed in like this utopian of like having information should be free and everyone should have equal access to info, and that's how social networks started. And it wasn't until the .com burst popped that like you can have people that come together, because there wasn't really like that there's like crazy IPO incentive to like do that and come together. They were just doing it based off of pure interest. And it feels like when I look at like what's happening with the pandemic, it's like the IPO crash needed to happen for Web 2.0 to start, right? We've had crypto for about 10 years now, at least Bitcoin. And what we needed was the world fiat to crash in order to then like switch over to like its own currency. So there's like kind of analogies there that I'm thinking, because what happens is that you need an external shelling point that doesn't come from internally.
Yeah.
That not because what we're doing with crypto and what we're saying with DAOs is like we're this magnet and we're trying to draw people to it. But what happens is there's this external event that has pushed people toward us that's outside of our control, right? So this is a great time to like start these things, these experiments, because people are like, fuck it, why not?
I think like the .com boom, or like the .com boom and bust was like, that was like Web 1.0 being born, right? And then the financial crisis, like that was kind of like Web 2.0. And like, so like the .com boom was like information, like breaking, right? And then 2008 was like Web 2.0, the like money breaking. And like 2020 right now is like society breaking, right? Like the socioeconomic fabric, right?
Trust.
Yeah, institutions, and that's trust, authority, like that disintegrating, and like that's what Web 3.0 was like created to solve, right? And that's like what will bring Web 3.0. But like the whole idea of Web 3.0 is like, it's not Ethereum, it's not like software, it's not software for the sake of software. It was like MySpace, right? What was the purpose of MySpace? It was a website to build a website, but that's it, right? You organize these things, move these around. Why did Facebook grow so big? Is because like it wasn't just a website for the sake of having a website.
You got laid, and like you get invited to parties for Facebook.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like I've talked to like Economies and Aragon, right? Like both of them right now, or even other DAO frameworks, they're like DAO frameworks for the sake of being DAO frameworks, right? Like Colony is a product and like the underlying infrastructure, and Aragon as well. But it's like why am I in Aragon? Why are these like, what's finance? What's like voting? What is all this, right? Like that doesn't matter. You need to build abstractions on top of that are actually useful, that like, abstract away all the sort of like coordination like things. It uses these tools underneath the hood to kind of like make what it wants to do better, but it isn't like the thing that you want to do, right? You don't want to do a DAO, right? You want to accomplish something and then use DAOs to coordinate that. Another thing I kind of wanted to mention was like this idea of like, printing infinite money and focusing on just like pure like number go up, right? And like the number going up is the only thing that matters, and we want to accumulate as much wealth as possible. And like that mentality has like, that's what's kind of caused like, like destruction of like forests and like ozone depletion and air pollution and all these sort of things. And like that's not really necessary, right? We don't need to maximize the amount of money that we create or the amount of like GDP. We just need to like maximize like how much we create up to the point that it starts,
there's a difference. There's a difference between like not caring about wealth and like it's like that's. I think most people think of this argument and this viewpoint of like excess. It's not about like having money or having wealth. It's not important, right? That's very important, and that's crucial, and just to a certain level. But it's more about excess, right? Just like complete gluttony and excess, right? It's like that's really the problem, right? And I think we don't know how to be happy in society, and that's why we're taught how to like go after things and chase ideas, and it's a whole consumer like mindset of like things will like objects will make me happy, not things inside of me.
There's this idea, I don't know if you've seen, like Pete has been talking about it recently too, this idea of like donut economics. So it's like this idea of like this ecological ceiling of like we can like do this much like value creation and make our number go up to this point, and then we have like the social foundation of like if we have that's like the ceiling, and then the foundation is like we need to like create enough like money and value that we all have like water, food, health, education, income and work, peace and justice. That's kind of like our like optimal like temperature of society is like in between that zone of like the ecological ceiling and that social foundation. And like right now we've kind of just turned like the overclock on, like see how hard we can rev it until the engine blows up.
Do you believe it's morning? I'm alive, but that's the last thing on my mind. Do you believe it's morning?